the things I've done, the most fan mail I get is from Star Cops, undoubtedly. Because once you do a sci-fi, you know, those people don't let you go.
Police! Freeze!
It might well have been the BBC's best science fiction show.
These things are very much a matter of chance. And the luck wasn't with us.
You'd be forgiven if Star Cops didn't lodge in your consciousness because it ran for just one series on BBC Two in 1987. But for its loyal fans, it burned briefly and brightly.
I will miss you more and more, it won't be easy.
At a difficult time for science fiction on television, it cunningly targeted both science fiction and detective fiction audiences. Taking the well-trodden route to far-fetched fantasy, Star Cops set out to be realistic.
It wasn't going to be about hardware and special effects and flashing green lights and monsters.
It is an idea of what is trying to create a real world of the future with real parameters.
It was actually science fact. So that people who didn't like science fiction might think, well, I might look at that if it isn't.
Curiosity is what makes me a scientist.
Suspicion is what makes me a policeman.
Star Cops was an interesting thing for the BBC to do. It came at the time that they'd lost their love affair with science fiction. And in a way, it's a non-sci-fi science fiction show, you know, to the point where you're watching it thinking, was the science fiction setting an afterthought?
Star Cops may have been set in the year 2027, but its plots were to be plausible.
We've got drugs, men, sculptures, dead pilots. How many cases have we got going on here?
The dialogue believable.
Kenzie, the procedures that we wait here.
The procedure.
The cast refreshingly multicultural.
Konnichiwa, Anna.
Konnichiwa.
And its gadgets perfectly possible.
Question, genius. How can somebody be in two places at the same time?
The programme's mission was clear, but sadly the show never lived up to its considerable promise. What happened to the hit series that Star Cops could, and probably should, have been? Star Cops was born in the mid-80s, at a time of space exploration and Cold War angst. The shuttle was being used to build an international space station, and Ronald Reagan had unveiled Star Wars, his strategic defence initiative aimed at fending off those scheming Ruskies. It was more than 30 years since Quatermass, and TV science fiction was looking tired in comparison to Hollywood blockbusters like Star Wars and RoboCop. BBC head of drama Jonathan Powell knew that Blake 7 had been a recent hit and was keen to listen to a new idea from its script editor, Chris Boucher.
Like most freelance people, I was looking to get a piece of my own. And I came up with Star Cops as a radio concept, but they didn't bite, and I sold it to Jonathan Powell as a TV series.
Chris had recently landed writing and script editing work on top-rated police dramas Juliet Bravo and Bergerac, and it seemed to him like the right time to combine the pulling power of detective and science fiction.
Come to think of it, I gave up a perfectly pleasant script editing job with the occasional script thrown in to devote myself to Star Cops.
Like the show's creator, Star Cops' principal actors came from a police drama background. David Calder took the part of Nathan Spring, an old-fashioned copper who is moved upwards by his boss.
Commander, International Space Police Force. Got a certain ring to it?
A fairly hollow ring given a force of 20 so part-timers, unaffectionately termed the Star Cops. So he's selected for it and chooses to embrace it rather as a form of escape, I think. Plus the fact, of course, he can't stand space travel. He's like a Nelson, he's sick every day.
While still acquiring his space legs, Nathan begins to gather a team of renegade officers at his lunar headquarters. His key appointments are his American deputy, David Theroux, played by Eric Ray Evans,
Some of us are on a losing streak, Kenzie. Are your figures up or down?
A brash, slightly crooked Australian, Pal Kenzie, played by Linda Newton.
Listen, you pommy 1 minute wonder.
And the unreconstructed British flatfoot, Colin Devis.
Well, they've assigned Devis as the investigating officer.
Is that significant?
He's one of the department's all-time cretins.
He was very vivid when I read the script. It was quite clear what sort of man this man was.
Oh, that's why they put me on it. Because I'm thick.
And he was racist.
You know the Italians.
Sexist.
How about a game of hide the sausage?
But you sort of liked him.
There do seem only to be 4 of them, which may reflect the budget. I think even an underfunded and tiny police force should be able to manage more than 4 people at any one time. I think they added a few more later in the series.
Nathan sets to work in his gravity-free surroundings, whipping his team into shape, ready to solve a new case each week. Just about every other science fiction show before and since has conveniently ignored the seemingly insurmountable problem of simulating the weightlessness of space, but not the realistic science fact show Star Cops.
For the first couple of episodes, they worked really hard, and so, well, most of this environment is weightless, and so they have people with their hair floppy and their arms all over the place.
I think that the decision had been made, that we were going to start off with a bit of weightlessness and then sort of forget about it as the series went on, because it would just become tedious.
We just wanted to approach it in a way that wouldn't cost a lot of money, but be able to be done realistically.
Because what we used was the famous Kirby's flying harness, which is a thing you strap on, so all the weight's taken in your nuts, actually.
During our research, we were in close contact with NASA. We had a surprise visit by Pete Conrad, who was one of the men who'd been on the moon.
But he looked around the set and he did actually say with some of the stuff that he thought it was very reminiscent and looked exact, it looked correct to what he had to experience with weightlessness.
I've been doing my Star Cop routine. There's been another death.
I saw the report when I came on. Suit failure.
But it does just look rather pantomime.
It was a joke, actually.
And it became impossible in the end, it was just crazy. It had wires being moved, hoiked around, lights, and so you're flying like that. there's nothing smooth about it. And I suggested one day, I said, look, we're running out of time. Can I just try to mime you a slow motion move? And you just make sure you don't sort of look at the legs. I can do it with the body. Just see if I can do the reach out and get something quietly like that and just move like that. And we did it, and it was reasonably successful. I think in the end, though, the main emphasis was to try to find out how many scenes that were gravity-free we could cut.
Star Cops wasn't going to be beaten that easily, and Commander Conrad was impressed enough to help put the finishing touches to a scene where terrorists take control of the Earth-Moon shuttle carrying Kenzie and Devis.
Well, there's a man who can't wait for demonstrations.
Yeah, well, let's hope he knows how to use a weightless toilet. Otherwise, that'll be one place to avoid for the rest of the film.
He said, well, if they're on the shuttle and there's weightlessness in the shuttle, he said everyone's hair would be on end. And if they were asleep, their arms would sort of float up like this in the cabin. And this hadn't actually crossed people's minds, And so there was an instant sort of rethink. And so all the supporting artists had their hair stuck up in the air.
Well, get the weapons, Devis.
Well, thanks a lot, Kenzie. Why don't you take them out like I said?
I don't know where they got the terrorists from, but they didn't look like terrorists. They looked like militant hairdressers.
Take it easy. Take it easy or we're all dead.
Now.
There was a moment, I think, a bomb gets thrown and we try and save it. So there's that awful slow motion. Quick, get the bomb. We're trying to sort of save it from hitting the ground.
You all right?
Mate, I'm better than all right. When the press get hold of this, we're going to be heroes.
Struth. The terrorists were foiled, but the big weightless idea seemed to be falling flat. Still, Star Cops was able to rely on the acting and some strong scripts to get it through.
I think the strength of Star Cops is the writing. I don't think any of the episodes are realised as well on screen as they are on the page.
I'm amazed at at this combination of intelligence and complexity. I mean, it's something you just wouldn't have on the screen today.
It was the Reagan era, and there was the weaponization of space.
Space was offering up conditions where biological warfare experimentation could take place.
Oh my God. He's working on a space bug.
It's working out what crimes of the future would be, not in a sort of wild science fictional way, but just at how modern-day crimes, like smuggling or kidnapping, would be different with a space setting.
Germ warfare, cryogenics, computer viruses, industrial fraud and sabotage are all tackled by the crack Star Cops team.
I suppose we call this abduction. Would you count embryos as people?
I'm sure their mother does.
One of the things that was clearly talked about was embryo storage and sperm storage, because these were the perfect conditions.
What I don't understand is what a silly bitch had to have it done on the moon.
Because the chances of conception are doubled at low gravity.
The storylines were one of the great strengths of the show, and creator Chris Boucher set a high standard. But producer Evgeny Gridnev decided to bring in two, John Colley and Philip Martin, meaning Chris would write 5 of the 10 commissioned episodes.
I had nothing to do with I was quite happy with their excellent writers, obviously. But I had nothing to do with commissioning other writers. If it had been down to me, I'd have written all 10.
We gave them Chris's first scripts and the format and asked them to come up with plot lines that would incorporate all the characters, but bearing in mind where we were, what we were doing, and could they come up with something that was exciting but not impossible to do.
My episode was called This Case to be Opened in a Million Years. There are 2 themes in it. One is the dumping of nuclear waste in space, because it's an increasing problem.
Do you receive a lot of nuclear waste, Mr. Santonini?
We at Santoni Italia are only responsible for some of Europe's waste. It is deposited here on Moonbase before being sent on its way.
On its way where?
Away from Earth and Moon, amongst the stars.
In this episode, the Mafia have infiltrated a waste disposal company and are using its transporter to smuggle uranium mined on the Moon on the return journey to Earth.
And so the mafiosi on Earth could take the uranium and sell them to nations who wanted to buy them. So it's quite big money involved in that. The Star Cops have already arrested one guy that they suspect of mafia involvement. And there's a launch goes wrong, and they become involved in that too.
I wondered how you'd manage the heroics.
Your delay warning message came through. Come and save me, sport.
You bloody bitch.
Kenzie could be tough, but over time her hard exterior began to crumble. Working through long, lonely lunar nights, her inner feelings towards her boss began to show.
Mackenzie starts off as like a bad penny. And so finding herself in this world with a man who is morally quite tight, and this starts to express itself in a kind of a sexual friction between the two of them.
There was something I wanted you to see.
Well, of course, that's going to explode at some point. And they've become an item. Although how that works on a space station, I haven't the first idea.
Can't you do anything bloody right?
Obviously not. Would you get your hand off my neck?
I am not touching your neck.
The Star Cops team's relationships were developing nicely. But how would the new international additions to the cast settle in? Russian moon base coordinator Dr. Alexander Krivenko,
You are my comrade and brother.
and Japanese GP Dr. Anna Shun had both joined midway through the series, and a parade of other foreign nationals were added to the mix.
I'm very pleased to meet you.
One of the show's innovations was to imagine how a multicultural space community might actually get on. Great idea. But, and the more astute amongst you might sense a developing theme here, in practice, it didn't quite come off.
There was a bit of sort of, the Americans are always a bit brash and the Japanese are always inscrutable. There was also a certain amount of, quite often, Davis would get a line commenting on the Yanks or the Nips.
How much do you know about Hanimed? Only what I learnt from Madame Butterfly.
Who?
What's her face? Cheerful Chink.
We're more aware of it now because everyone is afraid and everyone's PC that you mustn't call an Italian a wop, or you mustn't use any what's called termed racist remarks nowadays. Then nobody took any notice of it.
You Europeans have always been naive where those Russians are concerned.
Yes, okay, I'll hold my hands up. They were stereotypical. But you can see the same stereotypes still knocking about in series and stuff. You can't beat a good stereotype.
So, even if some of the characters were slightly unreal in the end, there was a determination that they were at least going to say realistic things to each other.
Bastard.
Unusually for futuristic fiction, the way the Star Cops sometimes spoke to each other was decidedly, well, earthy.
I think it was important that we were allowed to get away with some reasonably fruity language.
Oh, shut off! Just remember who you're talking to. Sorry. Shut off, sir. Davis!
I never could see what the problem was with language. If you're going to use swear words in an indeterminate future, you've got to justify them in some way, or you've got to come up with new ones. But this was set in the relatively near future.
And so they just sort of talk to each other in a fairly normal way.
The plausibility of the language and the dialogue meant that believable settings for the action were vital. So the pressure was on the Star Cops design team to rise above the show's modest budget.
The miniature and the effects work on it, I have to say, because I didn't do it, it was actually top-notch. They really had the opportunity, presumably they had more money, to make the miniatures really realistic. I think in the case of Star Cops that they got some very, very good stuff out of the people who actually did it. And I think for a fair amount of money, but nothing like film budgets.
I'm here, Nathan. You were thinking. Shut up, Box.
Box is rather sweet, isn't it? I mean, he now looks rather large given our size of our mobile phones.
Quite a lot of the stuff about, say, personal computers is pretty on the money. I mean, it's solid guesses about the way people would interact with technology.
Screen off.
There almost seems to be like the internet in Star Cops as well. They don't quite come out and call it that or use it as a concept, but it seems to be an underlying assumption.
The Star Cops were tooled up and back on the case. Now what the show needed was to make sure it got off to a great start. Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues had recently worked on the War of the Worlds soundtrack and had agreed to pen the Star Cops theme.
Quite a few dissenting voices, but generally I've got a lot of feedback at how good and original this music was.
The theme tune is quite a catchy, the theme song, sorry, is quite a catchy little number, but it's totally inappropriate for the series, and it always irritated me, I have to say.
I think it has the worst single theme song of any TV show ever. If you do, as I've done recently, and watch the whole blood, you find yourself fast-forwarding through. Yeah, it's so much just to not have to listen to that song.
Reach across the sky or whatever, reach across the stars or something.
I just wanted to get a gentle so that people weren't quite sure what they were getting into. And I feel music was emotive for that, and I stand by it.
More worryingly still, a consensus was difficult to achieve over the show's name.
Get on me through, please. Star Cops.
I still think it's a terrible title. I think I didn't watch this show in 1987 because of its terrible title.
I remember somebody suggesting at some stage that might even have been Evgeny, that the series should be called The High Frontier, and I loathed it and said absolutely not.
I think I did mention it to the head of drama, who might have said, no, we'll just leave it as it is, so I was overruled.
It still feels to me just like we'll call it this until something better comes along.
It was the way I keyed the scripts that I was working on. Star, I pressed star and typed in Cops.
The space between creator and producer was becoming a black hole, and it was starting to suck in cast and crew.
I think we all sensed all along that there were lots of battles being fought backstage that we didn't get to know much about.
I think there was an uncertainty as to which direction this series should go in.
What's more, some of the behind-the-scenes confusion was making its way onto the screen.
We are running out of time. How are we doing?
There were two teams on the programme. And the first team that came in, Chris Baker's team, and there was a separate designer there too, had decided to make Star Cops very bright, very clean, very modern in that way, which worked up to a point, except that I think that showed up the fact that we were in the studio.
It wasn't quite dirty enough. The machinery was a little too polished still, and I thought that people's living conditions and their uniforms and the like just looked a little freshly pressed.
Then when Graham Harper came in with a different designer to do the next 3, 4, 5 and 6, he got the lighting levels in the studio down to the lowest that they'd ever been. He actually was quite proud of the fact he'd broken a record. The lighting levels in the studio are the lowest they've ever been for any drama. So that nothing was lit. The only lights you would get were the lights from things like computer screens. That things were grubby. That rather than us having a pristine office, he got us putting in little artifacts, so we had little souvenirs. And then we went back to the first team on episode 7, it would have been, I guess, and we found out all the stuff had been chucked out. And we were back to the clean lines, and we said, actually, now we have a continuity problem, because you won't believe that we suddenly kicked it all out. They had to go out and find all this stuff, which was all in dustbins.
20 years after filming, the differences amongst the team and the tensions behind the scenes are obvious for all to see. Evgeny and Chris first met professionally when Evgeny only aspired to a producer's job, and Chris was a more experienced script editor. Evgeny achieved his aim and produced hit shows such as Blot on the Landscape and Hold the Back Page, before being considered for Chris's new show.
The pitch to Jonathan Powell was a written pitch. Then he called me in, and we talked about it. And at one stage he said, I think I'm probably going to get Evgeny Gridnev to produce. Can you work with Evgeny? And like a fool, I said yes. I'm sorry, Evgeny.
How would creator and producer get on now that the final decision was Evgeny's?
But I walked into his office, and as far as I remember, his first words to me were, "They'll all have to be rewritten." And I think my first words to him were probably something obscene.
As far as Chris is concerned, I think I respect him as a writer, and he's professional, and, it's his series, and if it didn't quite go the way he thought, that's unfortunate when you're dealing, when you're losing your baby.
I know we got off to a bad start, and it got worse from there.
Chris Boucher's beautiful idea had turned ugly. But with hindsight, he knows how it could all have been different.
I should have taken responsibility myself. I should have said, when Jonathan Powell said, can you work with another producer, I should have said, well, I'd quite like to do it myself. But the fact was that I didn't want to do it myself, so it is a bit hypocritical of me to say, well, I think he should have done so-and-so, and I think he should have done so-and-so. But at the same time, I think he should have done so-and-so.
With the penultimate episode about to go into studio, Star Cop's luck needed to change, but nobody told that to the BBC electricians, who promptly went on strike. Star Cops was not a priority show, and the episode was cancelled. So the next time the cast gathered, it was to record the final programme. They made sure no one walked under any ladders or brought in any open umbrellas.
Right, we are recording, studio. Very quiet. This is shot 23. Take 1.
But it didn't work. Eric Ray Evans wouldn't be appearing. He'd caught chickenpox.
Well, my second-in-command, David Theroux, he'll be back any day. It's on earth rest.
And I think it was an episode that Chris Boucher had written. For whatever reason, Chris couldn't come in and sort of rewrite it. So
Trevor Cooper and myself took it upon ourselves, quite arrogantly and quite rightly, to divvy up Eric's part.
So it really was, TV on the hoof. We're making it up as we went along.
I don't know, there's a pattern emerging here somewhere. God knows what it is.
Thanks to the efforts of the cast, recording was complete, and both Chris and Evgeny crossed their fingers for decent audience figures and good reviews.
It's moments like this which explain the less pleasant smells of space travel.
Scares the crap out of you too, huh?
The noises from upstairs after the first episode were very good and congratulatory. and then it went quiet.
I remember a script editor I was working with said he watched the first episode and thought, poor old Chris. And I thought, you bastard, what do you mean poor old Chris, it wasn't that bad?
Star Cops had been given a Radio Times front cover, but was then broadcast at a variety of different times through the BBC Two summer schedules, landing opposite high-rating BBC One shows like Terry and June.
To me, this was an act of sabotage and absurdity. And if ever you wanted to wave goodbye to a series, do that.
Some people loved it, some people hated it. And really, it was slightly difficult to gauge because we got some terrific reviews and we got some absolutely awful reviews.
Tomorrow is another day.
When did I program you for platitudes?
The program merely...
It sort of, it rose without trace. It just sort of disappeared, really.
Bang goes another good idea.
Viewing figures tailed off and the realistic, multicultural, prophetic and well-written Star Cops faded away, along with any chance of a second series. As well as suffering from production problems, it seems that instead of appealing to both police drama and science fiction audiences, Star Cops fell into the gap between the two.
It was a strange series that didn't convince the non-SF fans, and it didn't endear itself to the SF fans. I think it was a curious sort of, it was like a furry fish. It wasn't one thing or the other, really.
What you got was science fiction fans going, oh, bloody hell, what's this? Where's the aliens? Where's the latex masks? And the detective fiction going, it's out in space. No, sorry.
It was still regarded as science fiction, and wasn't really high on the priority of programmes, and there was nobody championing it, I don't think.
I think Star Cops was one little last dramatic splutter. The only sign of science fiction after that was Red Dwarf, which gleefully sort of sent up all the cliches of the genre.
Although far from flawless, the show is remembered by its many fans as one of the most underrated and best-written science fiction shows ever. It was just outside the top 10 in a poll of science fiction writers' favourite series, and the 9 Star Cops programmes have been released on DVD. So, despite their differences, Chris Boucher and Evgeny Gridnev made Star Cops into what it is, to many, an overlooked gem.
I think if it had come back for another couple of seasons, it might well have been the BBC's best science fiction show.
I felt that it was a lost potential of some really exciting television storytelling.
And if I ever do go into the West End or in the London theatre, there will always be, outside the stage door, some people with Star Cops stuff that they want me to sign. It still, lives on in that way.
Anyone from Mars? Would I play Nathan Spring again? Yes, most definitely. Oh, yes. He'd be this man now, With all that experience, yes, it would be tougher and harder and better, I think.